The time is 11:20 p.m. in the small town of Diaz in northeastern Arkansas. Other than the unusually warm temperatures of nearly 80 degrees and the strong southeasterly winds, the town is quiet and most people are already fast asleep. However, not everyone is asleep at this hour. Police Sergeant Richard Morris of the Diaz Police Department is out in his SUV, making his usual late-night rounds. To Sergeant Morris, this Friday night the town seems as calm and as quiet as it usually is at this time of day. However, the calm and quiet throughout the small community of Diaz would not last for much longer. Suddenly, nearly every phone, TV, and weather radio throughout almost the entirety of Jackson County, Arkansas, where Diaz is located, blares. Tornado warning, the alert blares, instantly waking up nearly all 1,300 people living in Diaz. Just miles to the southwest of town, a large, violent tornado with winds up to 190 miles per hour is screaming towards the north side of town at nearly 45 miles per hour. However, amongst all the chaos unfolding, Sergeant Morris calmly tends to his radio, as he has dealt with hundreds of situations just like this over his time as a police officer in Arkansas. As the tornado begins to rip its way through the northern side of Diaz, Sergeant Morris is radioed to block off all the roads that lead to the northern end of town in order to stop people from driving straight into the tornado's potential path. However, as Sergeant Morris drives west along West Main Street, his SUV is quickly overtaken by the intense, outer bands of the tornado. In an instant, his SUV is rolled and thrown hundreds of yards down Main Street. When the vehicle finally comes to a rest, Sergeant Morris is left hung upside down by his seatbelt, where he will remain for another hour until he's rescued, but fortunately, still alive. In just 23 minutes, the large, fast-moving, violent tornado rips an over mile-wide path of damage throughout parts of northeastern Arkansas, causing at least 2 serious injuries and leaving a trail of almost complete destruction in its wake. Nearly a week before the 14th, forecasters at the SPC were already eyeing a potentially major severe weather system in the Midwest for the 14th. However, at this point, the large spread and possible outcomes represented in models prevented the SPC from designating a specific risk for this area. On March 9th, the SPC introduced a 15% risk for severe weather over a large portion of the central United States, mentioning a widespread severe weather event was possible. Next day, on the 10th, the risk was upgraded to a 30% due to multiple forecast models beginning to come into agreement on an all-hazard severe weather threat becoming more and more likely. The all-hazard severe threat included a supercellular focus mode that would potentially evolve into a QLCS threat later into the night. The SPC then maintained the 30% risk on the 11th, with only a small northward expansion of the highest risk area. On the next day, the Day 3 outlook first mentioned the potential for significant tornadoes, and an upgrade to moderate was denied due to concerns about storm mode. Storm mode is extremely important in severe weather forecasting due to the different impacts that different storm types can have. For example, a more linear mode can cause more widespread wind events with less hail and strong tornado potential, while a more isolated threat can cause more significant hail and tornado threat. However, by the next outlook, it became more and more evident that the storm mode would be isolated and thus more conducive for significant tornadoes, and a moderate risk was issued. On March 13th, the SPC upgraded the risk for March 14th to a moderate risk over parts of the Middle Mississippi Valley, including much of Illinois and Missouri, alongside small parts of Iowa, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Tennessee. This risk was described as a regional outbreak of severe storms, driven by the risk of storms producing swaths of damaging winds potentially in excess of 75 miles per hour over the region, with areas further south expected to be conducive for the development of strong, supercellular tornadoes later in the day. By the Day 1 outlook, the 15% moderate risk for significant tornadoes was expanded to include a significant portion of the central United States. A significant tornado outbreak was on the way for millions of people. As the sun rose on the morning of the 14th, the atmosphere began to rapidly prepare itself for the incoming tornado outbreak possible later in the day. Temperatures rose to the upper 70s, dew points rose to nearly the upper 60s, and Cape values quickly rose to nearly 2,000 to 3,000 joules per kilogram. CAPE, or convective available potential energy, is the measurement of instability in the atmosphere that is needed to produce potent severe thunderstorms. Additionally, shear values rose to extremely rare values of nearly 80 knots. Shear is the change in wind speed and direction with height, which organizes thunderstorms into rotating supercells. This extremely high amount of shear was provided by a nearly 100-knot upper-level shortwave trough. Shortwave troughs provide lift or forcing, which is required for the development of thunderstorms and convection. Additionally, shortwave troughs not only provide forcing, but they also are associated with systems that provide other ingredients for formation of thunderstorms, such as instability, wind shear, and helicity. All of these ingredients together provide storms a ripe environment to produce significant severe weather and strong tornadoes. The most favorable zone for significant tornadoes was the southern portion of the risk due to richer, low-level moisture. The higher tornado potential was also there due to an expected supercellular mode, which was caused by the presence of strong upper-level flow and strong deep layer shear from the southern portion of the shortwave. By 10:25 a.m., the first band of convection fired over southern Kansas and northwestern Oklahoma. These early storms moved into a region of high atmospheric stability, with the minimal severe hazard risk expected to be limited to small hail up to 1¼ inches. Additionally, further north into Iowa and northern Missouri, the SPC was expecting the formation of an intense squall line to initiate between 3 and 5 p.m. Hazard for this portion were mainly significant wind potential. However, later in the afternoon and further south in the more favorable tornadic environment, a mesoscale discussion was issued for the potential of numerous supercells to produce potentially significant tornadoes. And by 4 p.m., a PDS tornado watch was issued for a significant portion of the central U.S., mentioning the potential for strong to possibly even violent tornadoes through the evening. PDS watches are rare variations of tornado watches, reserved for high-confidence forecasts of multiple strong or violent tornadoes. As the afternoon continued to go on, the potential for a violent tornado outbreak only continued to grow. By late afternoon, isolated supercells began to fire along multiple boundaries across portions of Missouri, Arkansas, and Illinois. If these supercells were able to maintain their isolated nature over the next few hours as the low-level jet continued to arrive, they would have the potential to produce violent tornadoes. The low-level jet, or LLJ, commonly kicks in the late evening hours and can rapidly cause potent supercells to become much more conducive for tornadoes due to greatly increased low-level shear. However, as the storms continued to track eastward, it was obvious that they would stay isolated. A large-scale tornado outbreak across a large area of the central United States was imminent. At approximately 8:20 p.m., a lone supercell fired near Plainview, Arkansas, in central Arkansas. For nearly an hour, the storm continued to intensify, and by 9:15 p.m., a severe thunderstorm warning was issued for the storm, with a tornado possible tag. The supercell then weakened for a short period of time, then re-intensified to severe level for a second time around 10:30 p.m. By 10:50 p.m., the storm had begun producing a potent rotation signature visible on radar, and a tornado warning was issued. Then, at 11:13 p.m., a tornado touched down in the small community of DeParty near DeParty Creek Road, initially snapping tree limbs. The tornado then quickly intensified to EF2 intensity, snapping several power poles along Buzzard Roast Road. Along Meadow Lake, several poultry homes were extensively damaged, and multiple trees were snapped at EF1 intensity before the tornado crossed DeParty Creek into Jackson County. The tornado then grew in size and intensity as it traversed through rural areas. As the tornado crossed Arkansas 14 east of Max, the tornado impacted Jones Farm. Here, a well-built office building was leveled at low-end EF4 intensity with estimated wind speeds of 170 miles per hour. Across the property, a one-story home in front of the office building was mostly leveled, with the bathroom remaining. Another home sustained similar devastation. Additionally, 4 soybean silos were destroyed, a farming equipment building was mangled with 2 metal pillars yanked out of the ground, a large metal tank was thrown and mangled, and several large metal buildings were leveled and swept away. Large hardwood trees were also severely debarked and denuded nearby, and a trailer was thrown 100 yards onto a home, injuring a resident taking shelter in the home. As it was impacting this neighborhood, the tornado reached its peak width of 1,760 yards. Soon after impacting the Jones Farm area, a new tornado warning was issued for a large portion of Jackson County, with a note of a damaging tornado ongoing, as evident from radar and spotter confirmation. As the tornado continued to move northeast, it weakened to EF3 intensity. Here, several trees along White River were snapped and severely debarked at 150 miles per hour. Nearby, multiple metal truss towers were heavily damaged and mangled. After crossing the river, the tornado then made an abrupt north-northeast turn as it weakened to EF1 intensity, grazing the southern side of the town of Jacksonport. Here, pecan trees were uprooted as the tornado shifted back to a northeastern direction. The tornado then narrowed in size and re-strengthened to high-end EF2 intensity. Numerous trees and power lines were snapped and uprooted along an oxbow lake called the Cutoff. As the tornado neared the community of Fitzgerald, northwest of Diaz, the tornado reached its peak intensity of high-end EF4, with an estimated wind speed of 190 miles per hour as the tornado moved through a neighborhood along Arkansas 17. Here, a large, anchor-bolted home was leveled and mostly swept from its foundation. Additionally, multiple metal buildings were obliterated near the home, several trees were debarked and denuded, and several vehicles and a dump truck were thrown 75 to 200 yards. Another nearby home sustained extensive damage to its southern exterior walls at EF3 intensity. After crossing Arkansas 17, the tornado then weakened to low-end EF3 intensity as another metal building was destroyed, with a home nearby sustaining severe roof damage. The tornado then weakened slightly more to high-end EF2 intensity, inflicting significant roof damage to a home and extensively snapping trees as the tornado began scouring bare soil onto the ground. The tornado then struck the city of Campbell Station at low-end EF3 intensity, collapsing a microwave tower along Campbell Lane. Several homes in the city sustained significant roof damage, and an SUV was thrown from one of the damaged homes into a field. Additionally, a large steel tank was thrown nearly 3,000 feet and landed along Arkansas 367. Continuing northeast, several trees along Jackson 43 were snapped and uprooted before the tornado eventually dissipated southeast of Tuckerman along Village Creek Road, south of Arkansas 37 at 11:35 p.m. In total, the tornado was on the ground for 23 minutes, during which it traveled 18.62 miles and reached a maximum width of 1,760 yards. The tornado's estimated wind speeds peaked at high-end EF4 intensity, with winds up to 190 miles per hour, as recorded in the northwest side of Diaz. Fortunately, despite the intensity, no fatalities were reported from this tornado. However, at least 2 people were injured, including a police officer who was seriously injured when his patrol car was tossed by the tornado. The intense damage left by the tornado was extremely evident, even in the late hours of the night. However, the true extent of the damage would not be visible until daybreak. The morning after the tornado, the violent damage left behind was evident. The National Weather Service surveys continued for multiple days, but finally concluded that an EF4 190 mile/hour rating was sufficient for the damage caused by the tornado at the well-constructed home northwest of Diaz. The day after the tornado, the city had set up donation sites at City Hall and at the fire department. Nearly 200 people showed up to support the cleanup efforts in the day directly after the tornado, and the numbers only continued to rise as the days went on. Over the coming days, numerous organizations and agencies worked to help clean up the debris across Diaz. Just a week after the tornadoes hit town, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders visited the communities of Diaz and 56. On her visit, she met with local leadership and created a supply box for the victims of the tornado. Additionally, throughout the states of Arkansas, Missouri, Illinois, Louisiana, and Mississippi, numerous other violent tornadoes had ripped their way through towns and cities. In total, the March 14th through 15th tornado outbreak became the largest tornado outbreak in the U.S. ever recorded in the month of March, with 118 confirmed tornadoes. Additionally, the entirety of the outbreak caused an estimated $6.25 billion in damage across 8 states and unfortunately killed 43 people. The March 14th tornado outbreak went down as one of the largest and most wide-scale tornado outbreaks in U.S. history, especially due to how relatively early in the year it occurred. The Diaz tornado was the strongest tornado of the outbreak, with with 190-mile-per-hour winds beating out all of the other tornadoes' max wind speeds. Although the community of Diaz and numerous other towns were ravaged by the violent tornadoes, they have and are continuing to rebuild their lives with unwavering support and persistence. As always, guys, thank you guys for watching. These videos always take a really long time to make, so I really appreciate you for sticking till the end here. I noticed on the last video, a lot of you guys did stick till the end, even though it was a 43-minute video, so I really appreciate that. If you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you want to help support the channel any further, become a member today, and you can see some behind-the-scenes stuff on these videos. But yeah, anyways, I really appreciate you all for tuning in here. It looked like only 8% of you guys are subscribed. So if you're not subscribed, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe down below. But anyways, thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.